working with the pelvic floor PT was probably one of the greatest things I could have done for myself because it gave me such a greater understanding of my body. It's helped me to manage stress and stressful situations that have wreaked havoc on my pelvic floor. And in talking with different pelvic floor PTs, regardless of where you are at in life, everybody benefits from this. And this isn't just like a woman's thing. Welcome to the Dangerous Women podcast, where the intersection of fierceness and femininity fuels empowerment. Our goal is to provide women with insights to unleash their power. Grounded in the 7 principles of self-confidence, we guide women to embrace their duality, delicate as a flower, yet powerful as a bomb. I'm your host, Colleen Conlon, inviting you to join me as we explore topics on health and wellness, empowering you to embody the essence of your dangerous woman. I want to tell you about my experience in pelvic floor physical therapy. If you have listened to the first episode on the podcast, you know that I spent some time in pelvic floor physical therapy in 2020. Now, I have had 4 abdominal surgeries, and one of the surgeries was a little bit more intense than the others. So 3 of my surgeries were done laparoscopically, and then I had one surgery that was done where they had to give me a big scar on my bikini line. And after that happened, I didn't have any physical therapy. I didn't have any pelvic floor physical therapy. I just went back to life. So in my early 20s, I started noticing that I was getting some really intense pelvic floor pain. And this was not directly related to my period. So when I was 17, I had 3 of my abdominal surgeries. And after the 3rd one, the doctors put me on the pill nonstop. So I have not had a period since I was 17. I'm 31 now. So the pain was different than like period pain cramps. The pain that I would experience would be triggered by either stress, like during 2020, just the stress of the pandemic. I could be sitting on the couch and have a freak accident. If I was working out too intensely, cycling, running, lifting weights, that could trigger an episode. Or sex. Sex was a very common one. So it would either be through intercourse or reaching an orgasm, to the point where I would just be like toppled over in the bathroom crying anywhere between 5 to 60 minutes. And at the time, I was so conditioned to think that I was bringing this pain on myself. So this is probably going to sound kind of twisted to most people listening to this episode. I was raised as a very conservative Catholic, and I was told countless amount of times that if you have sex before you're married, you're going to hell. God is punishing you. So I literally thought, okay, I'm experiencing all this pain, especially like after having sex. I was like, okay, I'm having sex, so God's punishing me. That's why I have this pain. And I would just like pray in the bathroom, like rocking myself forwards and backwards. Please, God, just make the pain go away. Make the pain go away. I've learned since then that that is bullshit. I don't believe that. Everything in regards to my surgeries, I believe, are why I've had my pelvic pain, given the trauma that happened in the area, given all of the scar tissue, and having waited so long to address it. So 2020, I'm experiencing this pain, and up until this point, I had talked to a few gynecologists about the pain, and I got really terrible responses. They'd be like, oh, just have some wine. It'll help to relax you down there during sex, or just have a baby. It's going to change everything from a hormone standpoint, and that could help. And it was really frustrating because one, I hated these responses, and two, everything was like just in regards to sex. And the pain I was having wasn't just with sex, it was with other components, specifically around stress, physical stress, and mental stress. So I knew something was off. At the time, I didn't really know where else to look. And then in 2020, the pain just got so bad that I remember going on Google one day and I found a pelvic floor rehabilitation center. So I go to my first appointment, and first appointment is with a physiatrist, and she is giving me this extremely detailed assessment. She's, watching how I move, watching how I walk, watching how I stand. She does an internal exam, very similar to what you would experience going to the gynecologist. And then she tells me what's going on, and we don't exactly have a diagnosis for exactly what's going on or why all of this is, happening to the degree it is. But she does say you have a hypertonic pelvic floor, so everything is really tight. And that's something I don't always hear a lot of women talking about when we're talking about the pelvic floor. A lot of times when I hear women talking about the pelvic floor and pelvic floor issues, the main things that I hear from clients or out on social media is talking about prolapse or talking about a weak pelvic floor. Mine was so tight that, pushing into it was setting my pelvic floor into whack. Like I was feeling like I was getting punched. So I asked, what are we doing? How do we take care of this? And we ended up doing 8 months of injections. So the injections included taking a needle, a very long needle, and they were injected. Technically, like as I'm thinking about this, I'm not entirely sure where we're injecting them, but we are injecting them down in vagina territory, and it somehow connects, I believe. I would actually love to double check this, but it's connecting to the spine. And the whole idea with these injections is to help relax the pelvic floor. And I had a really great experience. My doctor was amazing, and I remember asking her, like, this needle is so big. The first time it happened, I was like, can I look at the needle beforehand? And she was like, no, you don't want to, because it was huge. It's like the length of a forearm. I'm 5'6", length of my forearm, easily. Super thin needle, but really long. And I was like, why do I barely feel anything? And she was like, because I'm just really good at what I do. I don't know if that's the experience other women have, but I had a really good experience with the injections overall. I would say it was more like scary to get them done from a mental standpoint than it actually being painful. So after 8 weeks of injections, I start working with a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I ended up meeting with 2 different therapists because for the pelvic floor physical therapy I needed somebody to work internally on my pelvic floor muscles. And I don't think that's something that you necessarily want anyone doing. The first woman that I met with, I just didn't really vibe with her. I didn't feel super comfortable. And at this point, she wasn't even checking anything internally. Our first appointment was just like a meet and greet. The second time, the second person that I met with, she was awesome. She was so awesome. I was in a hospital, small room, like doctor's office room. My feet are up in stirrups, and she is literally massaging the muscles of my pelvic floor to help get them to relax. So if you haven't experienced this, this might sound kind of weird. I remember when I first was told this is what I was going to do, I was like, this sounds kind of sexual. This sounds kind of inappropriate. Are you sure this is what we're supposed to be doing? At the time, the documentary A is for Athlete came out, and I was just like, this sounds really fucked up. I'm not sure I should be doing this. But truth be told, it was a great experience. There was nothing that felt inappropriate to me about it. So most of our sessions, and I was working with this PT 3 times a week for about 3 months. Most of our sessions, I would be in the stirrups, she would be inside, she would be using her hands, or she would be using a pelvic floor wand to work around my pelvis and literally give me a trigger point release. And you can think of a trigger point release the same way you would getting a sports massage or using a foam roller. So these muscles, they get tight, and pelvic floor is, right above right in between our hips and right below abdominals. It is a part of the core makeup. So it's involved in everything that we do. And when we are working muscles routinely, we have to help them recover or they get tight. And when muscles get tight, other areas of our body might negatively be impacted because of that. For example, having tight pelvic floor at this point, what would life be like if you could get that toned look? You could have physical superhuman strength by training with just 2 kettlebells at home. What would happen if you were on a program that strengthens self-awareness and courage so that you can develop a deeper connection and trust to self? What about this? What if you could be in a community with other women where you are encouraged to be assertive and resilient to build mental and physical strength? If you're waiting to hear what the offer is, this is it. Swing to Snatch, a 13-week kettlebell intensive, is my signature course that empowers women to get started with kettlebells. Work with me live in a virtual container guaranteed to grant you kettlebell queen status. To learn more, visit www.colleenconlon.com. In time, I can tell, if my right hip is bothering me, it's probably because I need to do some releasing of my pelvic floor, which is crazy. This is something that I don't think enough people have normalized and talked about yet. And I just want to bring to your awareness that sometimes in order to make something like a hip, a knee, a foot all feel better, you got to get into the pelvic floor. And you don't necessarily need a pelvic floor physical therapist to do this. They do make tools. Intimate Rose is a great company. There is a podcast episode where the founder is on. It's one of the first episodes on the podcast where Dr. Amanda Olson is talking about pelvic floor health, and we talk about tools like the pelvic floor wand. But anyways, in my sessions, it's literally just like an hour where this therapist is massaging these muscles for me, and we're just like shooting the shit. We're talking about pop culture and sports and just like growing up and what's going on in the world. It was 2020 at the time, so both of us are like masked up and just doing the thing. The other thing that was really cool about spending time in pelvic floor physical therapy is gaining more of a mind-body connection with my pelvic floor. So I had no idea what it meant to drop my pelvic floor. I was aware of what it was to tighten the pelvic floor. So tightening the pelvic floor, think like Kegel, right? Like you can feel this like tightening sensation. I actually feel like I'm doing them right now as I'm talking about them. Everything's just like kind of tightening up. When it comes to dropping your pelvic floor, for me, it felt like a foreign concept. I was like, what do you want me to do? So when we first started talking about it, because that's what I needed to be able to do, I was so tight that I couldn't drop my pelvic floor. So one of our goals in pelvic floor PT was to get to the point where I could feel it drop and I could actively think about making it drop on my own. And it's been a game changer in terms of working out, like knowing how to relax the muscles to prevent the muscles tightening up as quickly as they would otherwise. And it's also really improved my sex life. Like, to get a stronger orgasm or to get an orgasm quicker, being able to play with dropping the pelvic floor has really increased my ability to have a fantastic fucking orgasm. So figuring this out, we used an ultrasound. So I have the speculum inside of me. I'm able to look at this screen, and my pelvic floor PT, Amelia, she would explain it as a flower opening up. So as you take an exhale, you're almost trying to allow petals to open. And what I'm about to say is not exactly it, but I'm going to say this a couple different ways for you. If you were to bear down to go to the bathroom, what does that feel like? And not so much towards the anus, but more towards the vagina. What's that feel like? Bearing down. Okay. It's not that exactly, like, we're not trying to put all of this like pressure down just to drop and relax the pelvic floor. But I want you to start with that concept and then go into a child's pose. If you're unfamiliar with child's pose, find yourself on the ground on all fours. Spread your knees out wide, get your big toes to touch. Your shoulders are stacked on top of your wrists. Now sit your hips to your heels, and you should start to feel space in your hips, and you should start to feel almost like this opening up around the vagina and the anus. As you take an inhale, just start to notice, what do I feel around my vagina? Whatever that is, that's probably the pathway for you to try to hop on to start thinking about what it feels like to drop my pelvic floor. So between working with the ultrasound, envisioning this flower opening up, and you know what, I think a better example of that isn't just a flower per se, but you remember Tivana? I don't know if they're still around, but Tivana had a tea bag that I think it was called like Blooming Flower, not to be confused with Bloomin' Onion. But a blooming flower. And that's kind of the vision that I think of when dropping the pelvic floor. Thank you for listening to the Dangerous Women podcast. If you had any groundbreaking takeaways from today's episode, please tag us on social at the Dangerous Women podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe below.